Short-handed from three. Hull comes soaring in again. Just uncanny knack. That cashes in.
Is on the upper left wing. Just got inside, circles around, pure.
What happened in Game 3 wasn't basketball at all. It was nothing short of a daylight robbery. The Indiana Fever had the lead. They were hustling, fighting, and putting everything on the line. Then suddenly, a flood of whistles tore the momentum straight out of their hands. Out of thin air, the Las Vegas Aces found themselves living at the foul line. Aya Wilson was tossing elbows, while Aaliyah Boston couldn't even get a single fair challenge recognized by the refs. Everyone saw it. The crowd inside Gamebridge, the audience on social media, and even the official box score tells the same story. The Aces didn't dominate the Fever. They were simply gifted that win. And perhaps the most frustrating part? It completely buried Lexie Hull's fearless, career-defining performance. So, do you believe the Fever can rise stronger in the next game? If yes, type in the comments. Fever fight back.
A'ja Wilson sets a screen where she extends her leg out, but of course they call the foul on Lexie Hull for A'ja Wilson's illegal screen. Then A'ja Wilson and Alyssa Smith totally foul Michaela Timpson, but there is no call. Could have took a 1-point lead going into half. Now we're up by 3 and they call a foul that isn't a foul. So we don't get calls when we're getting hit, but the Aces get a call when nobody touches anybody.
Game 3 was downright messy. But let's be honest, this wasn't the first time Indiana found themselves battling against two opponents at once. From the opening tip of the series, the officiating has leaned on Las Vegas like a constant crutch, throwing the balance of fair competition completely out the window. The evidence was clear in Game 1. Vegas clawed their way back, not through skillful plays, but at the charity stripe, while Indiana's tough, physical defense was judged by an entirely different standard. The Fever would dig in, stand strong on every possession, bodying up with pride, yet somehow the sequence always ended with the Aces heading to the free throw line. That unfair tone was set early, and by the time Game 2 arrived, the trend had only grown louder, with the whistles sounding even sharper and the calls becoming painfully one-sided.
Steph, why don't you think you were able to find any flow, and when that was the case, what are you trying to do to jumpstart things, maybe on the defense?
Well, it's hard for us to find flow when there's a foul call every 10 seconds. I mean, it just really is. And when they're at the free throw line, we can't get up and down the floor, and that's a challenge. They were much more aggressive and physical defensively, we didn't counter that with our off-ball actions or with our back cuts. So they took us out of our comfort zone. I mean, offense is about rhythm, it's about timing, it's about spacing. We allowed them to do that, and they kept us from doing it.
From the opening minutes of Game 2, the whistles kept stacking up quarter after quarter. What looked like small annoyances early on grew into a steady weight dragging down Indiana's flow, to the point where Stephanie White had no choice but to call it out afterward. By the third game, it wasn't just an irritating trend. It had turned into a solid wall the Fever couldn't break through. The nightmare moment arrived in the third quarter when Aaliyah Boston tried to contest a foul call on Jackie Young. White motioned for a review. The bench stood ready, but the officials refused to even acknowledge the challenge. Just seconds later, Chelsea Gray knocked down a huge three-pointer. Instantly, the Gamebridge crowd shifted from roaring with fire to gasping in shock as Indiana's once secure lead evaporated.
A'ja Wilson is 1 for 12 as a foul is called on Boston, and that will be number 2 on Aaliyah Boston.
You saw Indiana picking up full court pressure defensively, and if you're Aaliyah Boston, that's the one spot on the floor you do not want to get a foul call.
And Stephanie White is trying to challenge it and did not call the timeout in time. Gray in the corner.
This wasn't only about the scoreboard shifting, it was about the message being sent. The Fever had battled with enough grit to create real separation, and in just a blink, all that effort was erased by a whistle and another Vegas bucket. Inside Gamebridge, fans erupted in frustration, waving their arms and shouting at referees who acted as if nothing had happened. Almost instantly, clips of the entire sequence went viral online, with detailed breakdowns pointing out how the ignored challenge completely changed the momentum in a single possession. Those same viral videos also exposed a string of obvious flops, sneaky pushes, and relentless elbows from the aces that the officials barely bothered to notice.
2-minute recap from last night. So A'ja Wilson pushes Howard in the back. Howard pushes her in the back. It's a foul on Howard. Look at this. Aaliyah Boston gets totally fouled by Nalissa Smith. Like, it's obvious, but no call. And then A'ja Wilson gets the call for not half as much. And then Nalissa Smith gets the call for not even getting touched. Here's a replay just to prove it to you. Yep, didn't get touched.
What makes it sting even more is how the whole thing feels less like an innocent oversight and far more like an outright favor. A'ja Wilson could lower her shoulder straight into Boston. Defenders were being knocked flat on the hardwood without a single whistle, and wild, swinging arms somehow passed as defense the moment you wore a Vegas jersey. On the other side, every scrap of contact from Indiana was treated as if it were a full-blown crime scene investigation. The outcome wasn't momentum built through talent or skill. It was momentum gift-wrapped and handed over by referees wielding their whistles like weapons of control.
Offensive foul, practically a football check, and the Aces score. So now the Aces cut it to 2, and then A'ja Wilson sets an illegal screen, and they tied things up. And then Lexie Hull gets called for a foul for doing nothing when they just had 2 illegal screens they didn't call. All right, so this is fair. Same thing happens on the other side, but they don't call a foul for Kelsey Mitchell. So Leah Boston gets called for this foul for getting her arm grabbed, but Stephanie White can't challenge. They won't let her. That's the second time this game they didn't let her have her challenge. And then A'ja Wilson starts acting like a big baby.
Yet what could have broken the spirit of a weaker roster only lit a spark for one determined Fever player, because Lexie Hull refused to let this game be remembered solely for bad officiating. How often do you witness a player who, on paper, probably shouldn't even be on the floor, nearly shift the entire direction of a playoff series? That's exactly why Lexie Hull became the true headline of Game 3. She wasn't even expected to suit up. After aggravating her back during the opening contest of the series, she entered Friday marked as questionable. Her practices were shortened, her movement looked stiff in warm-ups, and even the crowd seemed to brace for minimal impact. But instead of playing a few token minutes just to spell her teammates, Hull transformed her night into a gritty, unforgettable performance that Fever fans will carry with them long after this series' history.
Boston has the mismatch on Lloyd. Help comes. Kick out. Hull will fire. And hit from 3. Last 2 positions inside from Indiana. Smith tied up by Hull. And a jump ball between Smith and Hull.
Despite playing through obvious pain, she delivered a stat line that could have easily belonged to a fully healthy star. 16 points, 10 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 blocks, and a steal, all while shooting an efficient 6 for 10 from the floor, including 3 massive triples that felt like lifelines whenever Vegas threatened to close the gap. Those threes carried even greater weight because they tied her with a franchise playoff record across 2 games, 8 in total, an achievement almost nobody would have expected from someone fresh off a questionable injury report. Game 3 also marked her postseason career high with 16 points against the defending Aces. What stood out wasn't only the impressive numbers, but the fearless way she earned them. Every hustle play, every desperate rebound, every loose ball. She threw her body into situations that most injured players would have instinctively avoided.
On the left side of the floor, just to clear out, letting Jackie Young go to work.
Jackie Young with 17 points. Boston to the corner. Hull, catch, fire, and hit. Correct call. Evans dishes. Ray whips a pass inside. What a denial from Lexie Hull.
The Hull able to save the play.
12-point game, a little under 2.5 to go. Hull hits Indiana's first field goal of the quarter.
At several points, the cameras caught her face tightening in visible discomfort, but that never stopped her from battling inside. She boxed out frontline players, chased down rebounds that should have belonged to taller aces, and even hurled herself onto the hardwood, wrestling for boards before gathering just enough strength to sink another shot. Each of those moments gave the Fever new bursts of energy whenever the officiating seemed determined to drain it away. Even as the Aces piled up points at the free throw line, Hull kept Indiana alive by refusing to let possessions simply die. That relentless willpower is exactly why the crowd bonded with her so deeply. Fever fans understood what they were witnessing. A player sacrificing her body and pushing through pain simply because her team desperately needed her.
Back to Hull, wide open three is good.
The floor that she wants, doesn't it?
It does. Mitchell, connect. Here's Mitchell. Mitchell, one more. You bet.
What makes the entire night sting so deeply is the cruel contrast. On the very same night Lexie Hull delivered her best playoff performance in an Indiana jersey, all the conversations centered on the endless whistles that flipped the scoreboard upside down. That kind of relentless effort should have owned the spotlight, yet it was buried beneath layers of controversy. Maybe that's why Hull feels like the ultimate reflection of this Fever squad, beaten down, underestimated, doubted, but still refusing to ever give in. And if Hull embodied grit, then what does it say about Las Vegas when their biggest star barely showed up at all? Imagine being the face of the league, an MVP frontrunner, and going nearly 3 quarters without knocking down a basket. That was Aya Wilson in Game 3. She opened the contest with a confident three-pointer that looked like the start of dominance, but then the shots simply stopped falling. By halftime, she was a shocking 1-4-11 from the field, and by the end of the night finished just 6-4-20. 13 points on 20 attempts isn't merely below her lofty standards. It's flat out poor for any starter in the Wnba. Instead of controlling the paint or setting the physical tone as she normally does, Wilson drifted further outside, settled for difficult fadeaways, and grew visibly frustrated as Aaliyah Boston forced her into awkward, contested looks again and again.
And here we go. She gets a foul call with a 3-point game for, I don't know why they called that foul, but it's the third quarter and they want them to win. So here we go. Ace is up by 3. They call another foul for A'ja Wilson that isn't a foul. All right, so then they call another foul on the Fever that isn't a foul. And then to end the game after it's out of control because the Fever had a 6-point lead, but they kept calling fouls, another foul for A'ja Wilson that's not a foul. Ball don't lie, A'ja. Missed 11 shots in a row during this game.
Even with Wilson struggling all night long, Las Vegas somehow still walked away as winners. That's the part that really eats at fans and leaves them shaking their heads. The Aces didn't even need their superstar to play like herself because everything else kept tipping in their favor, whether it came from favorable whistles or from teammates stepping up in big moments. Jackie Young carried the load with 25 points, knocking down momentum-shifting shots every single time the Fever tried to claw their way back. Chelsea Gray chipped in a steady 15, mixing tough layups with mid-range jumpers whenever the offense stalled out. And Alyssa Smith, who has shown inconsistency at times throughout this season, stepped up to make gritty plays on both ends that piled up exactly when the Aces needed a spark. So while their supposed franchise cornerstone kept clanking shot after shot, the rest of the roster stitched together enough baskets to ride both momentum and officiating back into full control. What made it worse, and even more insulting, was the way media outlets chose to spin it. Wilson's box score painted a very clear picture of offensive struggle, yet many writers softened the narrative by pointing to her rebounds, blocks, and a few assists, or simply shifted the spotlight onto the Aces' overall depth. What completely got lost in translation was the true reason behind her inefficiency. Aaliyah Boston smothered her on nearly every possession, denying easy post touches, shutting down space, and forcing Wilson into those uncomfortable, awkward attempts that make efficiency virtually impossible. When a league MVP ends the night shooting barely 30% on 20 attempts, that's not just a rough-off night. That's elite, disciplined, one-on-one defense. The kind of performance that deserves real recognition across the league.
You as well.
Here's Hull. Working behind Boston. Boston was open. Great take, and Boston lays it in.
Meanwhile, Wilson still managed to leave a physical stamp on the game, but not in ways that truly earned respect or admiration. There were sharp elbows thrown underneath the basket, undercuts on box-outs, and long arms swung recklessly into Indiana players. Contact that almost never resulted in a whistle. Yet somehow, the Aces continued to benefit from it. Head coach Becky Hammon even argued afterward that Wilson was fouled far too often, pointing to her lone free throw attempt in 38 grueling minutes. But here's the funny part. This is the exact same Vegas squad that practically lived at the foul line throughout all 3 games of the series. When you're consistently sitting on far more freebies than your opponent from start to finish, complaining about calls doesn't just sound hollow. It feels blatantly hypocritical and tone-deaf to fans watching closely.
She got hit a lot tonight. To shoot 1 free throw in 38 minutes, I know they told me not to say anything, but I can't.
Reality is, Indiana locked down Aya Wilson. They executed the exact game plan you're supposed to run against the league's most dominant player, and still walked away defeated because the whistles kept softening every single blow. That's why the Aces' victory feels so hollow. Instead of their superstar proving why she's the best, she was rescued by officials and carried by teammates who picked up the slack. That isn't a statement win. It's nothing more than a protected escape. Now, every eye shifts toward Gainbridge Fieldhouse, where Indiana faces one final chance to rewrite this poisoned narrative. Sunday night at Gainbridge isn't just another playoff matchup. It's pure survival for the Fever. Game 4 becomes their last opportunity to show they truly belong against a franchise that has been handed every favorable break along the way. Down 2-1, battered by injuries, and forced to fight through obstacles beyond the court itself, the Fever step in knowing one more loss ends everything. That sharp, unforgiving contrast creates a stage where absolutely everything is stacked against Indiana, but also a chance to shock the league.
Sims, voice, short, look at Hull, coming screaming in for the rebound. Boston, trying to body Wilson, and does. Sims back to Boston, going back to work and dropping it in. An aggressive and effective Aaliyah Boston.
Already, Becky Hammon has begun laying the groundwork, complaining about Indiana's physicality and hinting that officiating might finally tilt toward the home team this time around. The irony is almost laughable. After 3 straight games where whistles leaned heavily in Vegas's favor, the head coach of the 2-time champions is suddenly sounding like she's preparing for the calls to finally balance out. That alone shows just how comfortable the Aces have become with favorable conditions, and how much pressure they feel walking into Gainbridge, knowing full well the crowd won't sit quietly through another repeat of Game 3. And Gainbridge absolutely will not be silent. 17,000 Indiana fans are expected to pack the building, ready to turn every single possession into a nightmare for Las Vegas. This isn't just ordinary noise, it's a wall of raw energy. When the Fever get a stop, when Boston muscles her way inside, or when Hull buries a 3, that arena transforms into a thunderstorm the Aces have struggled to withstand all season long. Even Hammon herself admitted that Vegas doesn't enjoy playing here. That atmosphere is Indiana's greatest weapon, turning the arena into firepower and daring the Aces to prove they can survive without the safety net of officiating help.
Here's Boston, back to Hull. Sets herself up. Mitchell is free, laying it in. Been a while since Mitchell has gotten a shot attempt. Mitchell will get one here. And hit.
Indiana's approach heading into Game 4 isn't a mystery. They want to push the tempo from the opening tip, feed Boston early in the paint, and force Wilson to defend straight up without getting constant bailouts at the free throw line. Kelsey Mitchell also has to be established quickly after her rough Game 3, because her scoring bursts often determine the difference between trading baskets and building real separation. And Hull, her last performance can't be a one-game outlier. She's still battling through injury, but she turned into the emotional heartbeat of this team, and carrying that same momentum again could swing not only the scoreboard, but also the entire spirit of the roster. Vegas, despite being a reigning champion, is showing cracks everywhere. Wilson's confidence looks shaken after being locked down by Boston. Jackie Young is shouldering far too much of the offensive load, and their so-called depth hasn't been tested in a playoff environment as hostile as Cambridge at full volume. If Indiana can attack those weak points with intensity, this series doesn't just shift, it flips dramatically. Game 4 is about more than survival. It's about planting a message for the future, for what's coming next season when Caitlin Clark rejoins the lineup and this Fever core grows even sharper, stronger, and hungrier.
This first half, Young attacking and denied. Timpson on the block. Hull needs some help. Dump it in Boston. Find the cutter. Timpson lays it in.
Indiana didn't simply lose Game 3, they had it ripped right out of their hands. The Fever built a lead, defended with toughness, and looked ready to seize control, until the whistles flipped the game into free points for Las Vegas. That isn't basketball, that's interference. And now, Game 4 carries more weight than just survival. It's about proving to the entire league how empty those Aces wins look when the refs don't step in to bail them out. If Lexie Hull once again fights through pain and delivers with heart, if Kelsey Mitchell finds her rhythm early and heats up from deep, and if Aaliyah Boston continues to punish Wilson relentlessly inside, then Cambridge Fieldhouse can erupt into absolute chaos. Add 17,000 screaming Indiana fans to that equation, and suddenly the entire series tilts in the Fever's direction. Indiana's season isn't ending yet. In fact, it's about to get even louder, grittier, and more defiant. This is the moment where the Fever can turn heartbreak into fuel. This is the moment they prove that resilience, not favoritism, decides who belongs on the biggest stage. Do you believe Indiana can flip this series? Drop your support in the comments with Fever Rise Up. Like this video to boost the Fever. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. And don't stop here. Click the video on your screen right now to keep riding with us through every twist of this playoff battle.